Big Interview
with Bongani Bingwa.
16 after 7. There are 4 children under 15 in the house. Sometimes they are lucky because mommy comes home. They've never seen their fathers, you see. The eldest remembers an uncle who used to visit, but he's also been gone a while, so they don't know his name. What they do know are pangs of hunger. At times, the cramps of an empty stomach are so unbearable they pass out from the pain. This is the reality of some children in the Eastern Cape as hunger stalks the land. Do you remember that mother who couldn't bear to look at her hungry children, so she poisoned them? To share some more insights on this devastating reality, we're joined by Dr Eileen Carter, who is the Provincial Manager of the South African Human Rights Commission. This is the Eastern Cape Provincial Manager. Dr. Carter, I've described a hypothetical situation there, but it's all too typical, isn't it?
Good morning, Bongani, and good morning to the listeners. It's in fact not hypothetical. It's an absolute reality for children in the Eastern Cape, and unfortunately it looks like children in South Africa as well. The Commission has for 2 years focused on child hunger and severe acute malnutrition within the province. You'd recall 2 years ago we issued an investigative report after an inquiry we held and subpoenaing government departments to come and report on this issue. And from the reports, unfortunately, Bongani, it doesn't seem like the needle has been moved too much.
I said hypothetical because, of course, it was a fictional example, but it was to illustrate the point. How bad is the situation?
So the numbers of severe acute malnutrition cases in the province, it appears that it is on the increase. The recent report indicated that the deaths of severe acute malnutrition within the Nelson Mandela Bay area has more than doubled. And that is surely for us very alarming. We've been receiving reports from the government stakeholders and the entities responsible for the implementation of the recommendations that we made 2 years ago on a frequent basis. And what we can report is there was progress, at least progress on paper. But from the most recent numbers that's been published by the Department of Health, it appears that we are definitely not acting urgently enough.
The numbers have doubled since 2023. I'm not naive about the inequality in our society, but we're still, in many respects, a land of plenty. Why are children dying of hunger in South Africa?
So during our investigation and our inquiry, we found a plethora of issues that contribute to this. Now, one of the issues that we made a clear finding on to the national government was that the child support grant, the little money that families receive to support children and to provide food for them when they do not have an income, it falls way below the food poverty line. So these families can't even put a proper plate on the table for the children from this child support grant. But also we found that children are not registered at birth through the Department of Home Affairs, and other issues such as the coordination concerns between the departments to address hunger within these very susceptible households. Now, the recommendations were made, and Bongani have indicated that there has been progress, but again, we are sitting with severe acute malnutrition cases on the rise, and then as well the deaths of children from hunger on the rise.
Well, clearly that progress has not been enough. I mean, I mentioned the horror of the mother who poisoned herself and her little ones. I think there was a story in May of a 14-year-old boy who was killed by members of his community for stealing bread, jam, and I think it was porridge. I mean, they beat him to death.
Bongani, there's also been stories of children being poisoned after looking for food in dustbins. There's stories of mothers mixing porridge with sand just to increase satiety. These are realities. These are stories coming from the ground, and it's certainly no longer appropriate for us to speak about policies on paper because policies do not feed hungry children. Now, from the Commission side, the Constitution and our mandating legislation says we need to take steps towards redress.
Yeah.
Our first step was the inquiry. Our second step was monitoring what has been done since, and as I've indicated, there's even a policy on integration of food security within the province as a result of that report. But now we're sitting with the numbers still on the increase. So we have to ask ourselves, Is enough being done? And should we not again reflect on our report where we in fact called for a state of disaster to be declared?
I mean, what can be done?
So
what would be the next steps right now?
For a Human Rights Commission, we are going back to the drawing board and we're considering subpoenaing both national government and the provincial government. We've asked the Office of the Premier to declare a state of disaster because the Disaster Management Act has indicated that if a community is unable to solve this problem basically themselves, there is room for us to declare a state of disaster and have intervention.
But,
and then the second... Yes.
So hang on, but to be fair, sorry to interrupt you there, the Eastern Cape Premier, hasn't he declared this a state of calamity? And wasn't there a 60 million rand allocation? But as you say, the crisis persists.
So we can speak about the increase in budgets. Absolutely. Even Provincial Treasury, in this financial year, they mentioned the Human Rights Commission report in their budget vote, and there's money that's being allocated to this issue. Bongani, we are speaking about policies and numbers on paper. It's not moving the needle. So a clear-cut urgent intervention is clearly needed. It's the rights of children in terms of Section 28. It's immediately enforceable.
All right, let's go back. I interrupted you. You were telling me about the steps that now need to be taken.
So, Bongani, I mean, we have our mandating legislation gives us room to speak to these governments and call them to order and ask them to come to the table. And we are considering now the subpoena process to have the government departments and stakeholders account to the Commission. What have they done since the implementation or the release of our report? And ultimately, if it means that we have to go to court, that is also a consideration that we are busy deliberating internally. Because, Bongani, if you look at Section 27, it speaks to socioeconomic rights, it speaks to the right of health, it speaks to social assistance, and it speaks to access to food. But we do not have domestic legislation yet in place for us to be able to call what the parameters of that access to food is. But when we look at Section 28, Bongani, it's the rights of children. It's the best interest of the children. Now, if we compare those two rights, the rights of children in that section says it's immediately enforceable. It is not subjected to progressive realization or available resources.
Yeah.
So what does that tell us?
They're dying now.
It tells us we need to address it now. So we're going back to the drawing board, Bongani, because for the Commission, this is no longer recommendations. We need to move towards reality, and that's where we are now.
What does this do? I mean, say the child somehow survives. What does this do to a child, this type of hunger and malnutrition in the long run?
So there's a few medical definitions which I'm surely not an expert on, but it leads to stunting. It leads to wasting. And Bongani, that is not just an impact that is carried in the short term. It leads to long-term impact on these children. Now, we want these children to become engineers. We want them to study AI. We want them to become doctors. But in their early development, we are not giving them enough to reach their full potential. Now, for the Commission, we've surely indicated that for us is a right to dignity issue. It's the infringement of the rights to the best interests of the children. It's an infringement on their right to life and basic education. So it's something that we've been very clear on. We've engaged at various levels, even the provincial legislature as well as the executive this year. We've been actively speaking to them. Now with the numbers, however, coming, it looks like we are not moving quick enough.
So social grants, the school feeding schemes, all of these interventions that have been tried, you're saying ultimately aren't doing enough, aren't doing the job.
So the thing is, the school nutrition program is one of government's most successful poverty alleviation interventions, and it continues to be so. It feeds millions of children, but sometimes, Bongani, we have to also ask the practicalities behind it. There's a 0 to 5 cohort children that are not yet at school. They are not yet being provided with that meal. So they're falling through the cracks, and that is the very susceptible time where they might be subjected to severe acute malnutrition. Now, in our recommendations, we did indicate that the school nutrition program must be expressly rolled out to the ECD sector as well. They're receiving funding, but it's not as successful as the school nutrition program is currently. But there's movement. There's breakfast packs being delivered in the province. There are NGOs and CSOs assisting in these efforts. Bongani, the reality is that we're looking at numbers increasing, so we are not necessarily doing this on an urgent enough basis.
And then, Dr. Carter, you have leaders moving about in motorcades with blue lights and million-rand cars, armies of bodyguards, when we have a situation like this? What kind of message does that send, hey?
Well, that's what we are pronouncing on as the Commission as well, human rights budgeting. We have to look at the enforceable rights of our country and of our people first before we look at the luxuries. Not that I'm saying those are luxuries, but we have to go back to the drawing board. Ours is only to interpret what the Constitution is already saying, and I've reflected on this. Section 28 says these are immediately enforceable rights.
Dr. Eileen Carter, the Provincial Manager of the South African Human Rights Commission from the Eastern Cape. Just think about it. There are people who will cross crocodile-infested rivers to get to South Africa looking for opportunity. For all the problems we have, we're still a land of plenty. It makes no sense that kids are still dying from acute malnutrition and hunger.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.